Welcome to my conversation with Dr Jill Collett. I'm Julia Lindsay, iOpener's CEO. Jill is my colleague and a partner at iOpener. Jill was trained at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre and has many years' experience as a mindfulness practitioner. Jill, morning. Can we kick off by exploring what mindfulness is and what it isn't?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, Julia, because so many people come and talk to me about mindfulness, ask what's it about, and they have usually some kind of impression about it being something to do with a monk on top of a mountain, feeling really blissed out and sitting in the lotus position and just very peaceful. And of course, that's not the kind of mindfulness we're talking about here. It's a component of it. The monks traditionally obviously did train their brains, train their attention in the same way as we use it in contemporary mindfulness. But contemporary mindfulness is really, it's a secular practice, it's not a religious practice. And its main focus is to bring our attention into our moment-to-moment experience. And I think one of the ways I like to describe it is it enables us to be vibrantly connected to life as it unfolds. It trains our attention and awareness to be fully engaged with the experiences of life. And it gives us therefore a kind of lucid awareness. Now, you can imagine the benefits of this over time, and certainly in the workplace are great. And we'll go on to talk a little bit more about that later. I think the other thing that I always say to people is that it's a bit like going to the gym or training for a marathon or being a fantastic musician. It takes time. It's not the kind of thing you can just pick up and think about, talk about, learn about from a book. It actually takes practice and dedication and intentionality because it's something that we build up over our lifetime. Although, in fact, again, as I'll tell you later, we can change very rapidly. So even the initial stages of mindful practice can have very beneficial effects.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. What was going through my mind was the link with happiness at work, because we know at iOpener that people that are happy at work are able to give their best, are more able to give their best. And I wondered, what's the link between mindfulness and happiness at work?
Yeah, well, you're quite right about that, Julie. There's a very strong link because our happiness at work model, we call it the happiness performance model, because we know that when people are flourishing and have a sense of well-being at work, that impacts, well, nearly every aspect of their work life. And mindfulness is a really good partner with this, because with mindfulness practices, what we know from research is that it increases things like resilience, which has an impact on mental health and stress, anxiety, sick leave through mental health. And it also increases our immunity to physical illnesses. So resilience brought into the workplace is a very powerful thing, and it's a big buzzword around at the moment. You know, government's talking a lot about increasing well-being in the workplace, and mindful practices have been shown to have an impact on this. We also know that when you practice mindfulness, you spend more time on task. You can be focused more, you can have an intention to work on something and stick with it longer. And again, we're in an age when actually attention is in short shrift. You know, we're used to little snap bites, aren't we? You know, have a look at a phone, have a little bit of a look at what's going on online. It's much harder for people to focus their attention now. Well, mindfulness trains your mind like it trains a muscle to be able to focus. It also increases, it seems to increase emotional intelligence, which has an impact on, a big impact actually, on leadership and on relationships in the workplace. And so in all these ways, it's very, very complementary to the happiness at work model. I would also like to mention that just down the road from our home base, because iOpener's based in Oxford, the university has got a department of mindfulness. It's called the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, which was set up about 14 years ago. And it, together with a number of very prestigious worldwide universities, I'm thinking about Cambridge in the UK, Harvard, I mean, there's just numerous universities who are also applying gold standard research methodology to look at the changes and differences that mindfulness makes in the workplace. And so what I'm saying about the benefits of mindfulness are something that come from a very strong research base.
That sounds really impressive. And one of the things that I was just thinking about was the fact that, you know, we're all working in organisations dealing with complex business, rapidly changing business. You know, things sometimes, frankly, feel fairly chaotic. And I wondered how you see mindfulness fitting into that context.
This is something I feel really passionate about, Julia, because the challenges with the leaders that I'm working with now and the leadership teams I'm working with are huge. I think they've probably never been bigger. And you're right about the rapidly changing environment that they're having to negotiate with more and more pressures to perform on them. And actually mindfulness really brings a sort of centered stability. So if it's practiced over time, it creates that kind of weightiness almost, so that the slings and arrows that life in the business world and outside throw at you, of course they're there, you experience them, in fact you're vibrantly aware of them in some ways, but it also gives you a steadiness. And that's where the emotional resilience comes in, because we all know that emotional resilience doesn't mean that you can't see what's happening to you, it means that you can stand steady in the midst of this. And so practicing mindfulness in the workplace in that kind of rapidly changing world is particularly important. The other thing is that we know, again through solid research, that mindfulness practices tend to open up creativity in people.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And I'm wondering what organisations you've come across that are actually adopting mindfulness.
There are a lot, actually. There are a lot of big global organisations. I mean, mindfulness caught on in the States probably about 10 years before it began to emerge here. So we know that some of the big IT companies such as Google and Apple are very, very into it. I mean, Google has mindfulness rooms in all of its various locations over the world, and mindfulness practices are very much part of their culture. I'd say they're sort of developing a mindful culture. But there's also many financial institutions, for example in the City of London now, who are implementing mindfulness programs within their organisation because they recognise it's so important. And we also have engineering firms. I mean, there are many, many businesses beginning to do it now. And in fact, it really, I think with the government initiatives to make well-being and resilience such an important part of work now, I think it won't be too long before businesses are beginning to feel that everyone else has got mindfulness programs, why haven't we? And so for our clients to really get the competitive edge, I think now is the time to get into it, to find out more about it.
Yeah. And for any organisation wanting to grab that competitive edge and thinking that mindfulness might be a way of helping them, what advice would you give them?
So, I mean, there are lots of ways you can get to know about mindfulness, but as I said earlier, it's not really the kind of thing that you can read about in a paper and understand. And also a lot of the media that's out there is not terribly accurate. One of the things that I found is very popular with our clients is to go in and do a taster session, which is a couple of hours where we can give information, more detailed research information, but also some experience of mindfulness practices. And I've done this in many, many places. And the response is usually quite extraordinary. You know, people find it absolutely invigorating and exciting, and they want to find out more about it. So that's one way of doing it. My perspective is always, if you're going to make a real difference in an organisation, it needs to be something championed by the senior leadership. So my hope is that senior leaders are open and curious and perhaps will engage with mindfulness, what we can offer here at iOpener, and see for themselves. And on the back of that, once that happens, those leaders nearly always say we've got to have this in the wider organisation, because they realise it's going to have such a big impact on performance within the organisation. So it's going to achieve what they need to achieve for their shareholders. But it's also going to create a really wonderful organisational culture in which people can flourish and feel happy at work and therefore give more. I think that I would also say to beware of the kind of people you work with. So here at iOpener, we are trained to use the gold standard 8-week program, although that can be moderated according to the needs of the client. And it's very easy, I think, to feel, well, maybe we can just fit this in really quickly and have a little tidbit. Actually, the research that's been done is based on a program of some depth. And I think for it to be transformative for a culture, for it to have a really big impact, it needs to be taken seriously, and therefore needs to be given a strategic positioning within the culture. And obviously leaders are not going to want to do that until they've experienced it themselves.
Right.
That's fine, so we can do gently, step by step. But actually, ultimately, my hope is for our clients that they'll take a strategic perspective and look at how they can implement this throughout the organisation.
Fascinating. Really fantastic to talk to you, Jill, about this. It's a really interesting topic, and thank you.
You're very welcome. Lovely to talk to you too, Julia.